James was charged with murder in the first degree after a man was killed in Coconut Grove in the 1990s during a botched armed robbery. Except Thomas James lived in Brownsville, and he'd only been to Coconut Grove once or twice in his life. Did police arrest the wrong man? Well, here's James in a phone call from prison yesterday.
Hello, everyone. My name is Thomas Renard James, and I am better known as Jay. And I have been incarcerated for over 30 years for a crime that I did not commit. I was given a life sentence for a murder that took place on January 17, 1990 in the Coconut Grove car gable section of Miami-Dade County. It is my hope, wish, and prayer that my cries of innocence won't continue to fall on cold hearts and deaf ears.
Tristram Corden, a magazine writer and the director of journalism for the Florida Center for Government Accountability, tells this story in this month's GQ magazine. It's called The Tragic Case of the Wrong Thomas James. Tristram is joining us now. Great to have you back. First of all, how did you first come to meet Thomas James? How did you find this guy?
Well, it took me a while to meet him. First of all, thank you very much for having me on to talk about this case. I heard about Thomas James' case when I took an old source of mine, a friend who's a felon, out for lunch, and we were talking about the state's efforts to restore voting rights to felons. And at the end of the lunch, I said to him, "Hey, Sammy, if you know anybody who you think is, has a credible case of being wrongfully convicted, let me know." And Sammy said, "Shoot, I know a guy," and at that point he was in South Bay. "I know a guy in South Bay who's been saying he's innocent since the day I met him." And that led to this day.
And Thomas is doing life in prison during the past 30 years. He's been trying to prove his innocence at numerous opportunities. He reached out to the media to get help, but nobody responded. He even had reached out to you at one point, right? What happened then?
Yes, that was devastating to hear. I was interviewing him, and he told me, and I asked him about reaching out to the media, and he said, "I reached out to you when you were at New Times," and I kind of held it together for the rest of our conversation, but afterwards I was shopping in Publix, and I just had to, and it was in my head, and I had to turn down an aisle, and I just it hit hard, I'll say that.
Yeah.
But what happened was I had left New Times. I went back, I researched, I went to Sammy, because Sammy was the one who told him to write to me. And I went to Sammy and I asked, tell me about this. And Sammy said that he reached out to me in about 2005, and I had left New Times at that time. And that's still no excuse. And it's just a lost opportunity, 20 some years. But so journalists are busy. I understand. We all understand that. But my takeaway from that is that we all need to open our eyes to the fact that if somebody is taking the effort to write from prison, we should really give them at least a cursory attention they deserve.
Yeah. Let's go to James's story. And, before we talk about him being convicted of this murder that he says he did not do, he was arrested. And this is how he ends up in court. Yeah. And then there's this mistaken identity. But what was he arrested for in the first place?
So James was a sort of a small-time pot dealer in and around Brownsville. And he was picked up for a probation violation on an illegal weapons charge. The weapons charge was a significant escalation. Before that, he had just had trespass, marijuana possession, one battery on a law enforcement officer, which was when he was running during a raid and ran into a plainclothes cop accidentally, and they fell to the ground. But he was in jail awaiting resolution on this gun charge. He was in jail for about 3 weeks. He was brought in for his first hearing, and the clerk says, "Your Honor, we have a warrant out for his arrest for murder, a robbery near Coconut Grove." James is thinking, this has to be a mistake. They got my docket mixed up with somebody else, but it's not. He's charged with this murder. So things happen both fast and slow. After that, he meets his lawyer, a public defender, about 3 times over 6 months for about less than an hour each time. Then it's time for his trial, 6 months after his arrest on the gun charge. The trial lasts 2 days and boils down to two eyewitnesses, one of whom has a brain damage, head injury so bad he can't speak properly, and who contradicts himself on the stand. And then the other is the victim's stepdaughter, who clearly identifies James.
Yeah, and I wanted to...
And based on that, he's sentenced to life in prison. The jury convicts him 2.5 days later, and he's sentenced to life in prison.
And I want to go back to the murder. So, there was one night, two men reportedly entered a home in Coconut Grove. That home was owned by a Francis McKinnon. That's the person who was shot and killed. And as you said, there were two eyewitnesses that saw this man, and one person knew him as Thomas James, the other Thomas James.
Right. Correct. She had never met him. She just knew the name, she knew the name Thomas James.
So
she had never seen him before.
What were people telling police at the time about Thomas James?
Absolutely. The murder happened around 7 p.m. These two men, one wearing a mask, the other barefaced, walk into this apartment to rob this elderly couple who are living on disability, just outside Coconut Grove. The man of the house, Francis McKinnon, comes out of the bedroom with a gun in his hand, and one of the robbers shoots him. One shot hits him in the face and kills him. They flee. The police arrive and canvass the area, and residents are telling the police a dude named Dog and Tommy James did it. And you see that throughout the police notes, and you hear it on the tapes to the Coral Gables Police Department, the tip line. The lead detective then simply goes back to what was then Metro-Dade Police Headquarters that night, goes into the computer system and pulls out a picture of a Thomas James, and makes a photo lineup with him and several other foils, as they call them, and shows them around to 8 witnesses who all said they saw Tommy James or heard. In effect, they said they heard it was Tommy James, and nobody identifies him except for the stepdaughter and this brain damaged guy.
And I'm wondering, Tristram, from your research on this story, do you think the police did as thorough an investigation as they could?
No, unfortunately, this is the laziest policing I've ever seen in over 25 years of criminal justice reporting. I mean, there were so many opportunities to check up on this, but one of the major things was everybody said it was Tommy James. They clearly knew who the Tommy James they were referring to. And the stepdaughter and her mother, the victim's wife, even said, "We are related to Tommy James." People are telling us it's Tommy James, and it turns out we're related to him. We know his mother, Mary. That's in the police notes. It's in depositions. And Thomas Raynard James, his mother's name is Doris. He's not related to them. He's from a different part of the county. And the tragedy just compounds from there. And
have police responded to your reporting on this about how that investigation went down?
The police have not responded. The state attorney's office has responded.
Again, I'm talking with journalist Tristram Corden. His latest piece, The Tragic Case of the Wrong Thomas James, is in this month's GQ magazine. You can find a link to the story, by the way, on our social media at WLRN Sundial. And as we've been mentioning, Thomas James is doing life in prison. He's been in there for 30 years. He's investigated his own case. He's tried to figure out what really happened and tried to find that other Thomas James. Now, Tristan, right, you had a sit-down conversation with James where he explains how he uncovered the other one. Here's what he told you.
Now, I'm familiar with there's somebody with his name. So what I did, I went to my classification and asked her to look into it.
Classification is what? In prison?
Yeah.
Okay.
And she pulled the guy up, and when she pulled him up, she said, "There's another Thomas James." And I just asked, I said, "Can you look and see what his mother's name is?" And she said, "Mary." And I had it wrote on a piece of paper in the palm of my hand, and I had to show her. I said, that's the dude I'm in prison for.
All right, so he finds out this other Thomas James' mother is Mary, which, again, as you said, one of the eyewitnesses says, I know them, and their mother's name is Mary. But, I mean, Tristram, how in the world did Thomas James come to the realization there was another Thomas James, and that's probably the guy who did the killing, and he finds this out from inside prison?
Right. He's convicted, not knowing how all of this came to be. He's walking on the yard of the first prison he's sent to, the first year of his sentence, and a man comes up to him and says, you the guy in for the murder in the Grove? And he says, yeah, but I didn't do it. And the guy says, I know. You and the guy who did it have the same name. And that's when he realized there might be a case of mistaken identity. That was in 91. It wasn't until 96 that he got all his records, and why it took so long for him to get his records, I do not know. But it got all his records, and then he could see in all the depositions and all the police notes that the witnesses were clearly referring to another Thomas James.
Have you spoken to the police officer who did the initial investigation or the defense attorney from back then?
Yes, I reached out to the defense attorney, who can't speak on the record because of client confidentiality. And, you know, so we did not get into a long conversation. I imagine he feels horrible. The police officer I reached out to through an intermediary, and he declined to talk to me. Now, yeah, I mean, if it's not too soon,
yeah.
Can I talk about the other Thomas James?
Well, no, well, that's the other thing I was about to ask you, is you did talk to the other Thomas James. What did he say?
Right. So I reached out. So after, going through all the documents, when I was almost ready with this story, I reached out to the other Thomas James, who responded and said, yes, I know about the McKinnon murder. Please come talk to me. And I went and I talked to him. And the first thing he said to me was, no doubt about it, 100%, they were looking for me. They knew I ran with Dog. And in fact, Dog and I had cased that apartment. We were planning to rob it. Dog ran a robbery crew. They would steal from outlaws. And, but I wasn't there. In fact, I was arrested the night before. And I, Tristan Corton, went back and got the jail card for that time. And yes, in fact, he was arrested for robbing some prostitutes the night before.
Why, Tristram, why did you want to talk to this Thomas James? And are you surprised that he was open with you?
Well, I wanted to talk to him to, find out if he would, if we could clarify this. And I think he talked to me because he feels bad. He knows that this guy shouldn't be in prison. And, finally somebody reached out to him to ask him about it.
And again, as you pointed out, he said that, yes, I was the guy they were looking for because he was with Dog, and that was the other person identified in that house that night. Yeah.
Yes.
Are you? Go ahead.
The Dog. This is another amazing injustice in this story is that Dog, Vincent Cephas Williams, he's clearly identified by witnesses at the scene, and the same witnesses pick him out of a photo lineup. So he's clearly identified, and police never track him down. They never find him, which is amazing because a couple of years later, he's in a Miami-Dade courtroom on an assault charge, and he spent some time in prison on that. And nobody thought to link the two. It's very strange, and it's infuriating.
Going through this story and everything that you've learned about Thomas James and the proof he found, are you convinced of his proof?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've gone through it every which way in my head. And I don't see how he could have done it. It would have to go back to the witnesses being in on it and saying Tommy James. But even then, they're referring to the Tommy James they know. In addition, there was a witness in the apartment, a little girl, 8 years old, or 9 years old, who never gave a statement to police, even though they talked to her. And when she was in her 20s, she saw a flyer saying, "Help, Tommy James, he's innocent." And she said, "That's not the guy I saw commit the murder." And she remembers it clearly. And I contacted her. she's having her own problems with the criminal justice system. So I spoke to her lawyer, and her lawyer asked her for me, and she said, yes, absolutely. I will testify. I can remember it clear as day. That's not the guy I saw shoot Mr. McKinnon.
And briefly, what happens now? Is there a chance for appeal?
So the state attorney's office has the Justice Project is looking in. It's like their conviction integrity unit, and they told me they are formally looking into this case. They've reached out to Thomas James for more information, and they are investigating it. And that's where it stands right now. He has a lawyer. Her name is Natalie Figures, who is handling the legal aspects of this. And hopefully, I say it unequivocally, hopefully they will reach the same conclusion I reached after reviewing thousands of pages of documents. It's all there in black and white right in front of us. This
is an incredible story. Tristram Corden, again, latest piece for GQ called The Tragic Case of the Wrong Thomas James. Find it on our social media. Tristram, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing this story with us.
Thank you for having me on to talk about this case, Lewis.
Definitely. Again, find it on our social media, WLRN Sundial. All right,